dead in Ohio. Oh, dead in Ohio. Oh, dead in Ohio. Oh, dead in Ohio. Oh, dead in Ohio. How many more? Oh, dead in Ohio. Why? Oh, dead in Ohio. Oh, dead in Ohio. Oh, dead in Ohio. Why? Oh, dead in Ohio.
One day I was walking on a trail in Ohio, and I came to a fork in the path, and I decided to take the path that had not been traveled upon as much, and this path took me into a dense part of the woods. I was walking along this path, and as I got further in the woods, I started to notice these strange objects that were along the path. There was a set of steps that were up against a tree, and I also came upon this shelter-like structure that was made out of trees that had been put into a teepee-like formation. The path started to take these odd angles, and it became almost maze-like. I walked this maze for a while until I came to a gate that was across the path, and that gate had a padlock on it. But luckily for me, the padlock was not locked. So I opened the gate and I went through it, and I followed the path some more, and the woods became even denser to where you could not get off the path even if you wanted to, which made me feel a little strange because since it was in the shape of a maze, I thought to myself that if someone did chase me on the path, I would have nowhere to go. But I finally came to the end of the path, and what I found was really surprising. What I found was this large cage that had been put in the middle of this dense woods. And it was a huge cage. It was big enough for, over 20 people to get in. And it was about a good 8 foot tall, and I would say about 20 foot, 20 foot wide both ways. And I thought to myself, how in the world does someone get this cage back in these dense woods to put it up, and how did they put it up once they got back here? Because hardly any of the trees had been cleared off. The cage was just put in around the trees, or should I say that the trees were around the cage. It's really hard to explain. There were 2 smaller cages in the big cage. One cage was big enough for about 4 or 5 people to get in. And the smaller cage was even weirder because it was only big enough for one person to stand up in. It was covered in black material. It had a door on the front of it with a window in the door. And there was a milk crate inside of it, I guess for somebody to sit on. There was clothing strewn all about the cage, as well as food cans laying all around the floor of the woods. After investigating the cage for a while, I walked over towards the side of it where there was this campsite that had been set up. The campsite was just as strange as the cage. One of the first things that I noticed in it was that there was this upside down tree. And what I mean by upside down tree is that someone had uprooted a tree and then planted it so that the branches were in the ground and the roots were sticking up in the air. And this had been done some time ago because the ground didn't look like it had been disturbed. There was another tree in the campsite that was weird. It was covered in multicolored bottles. And it was actually really pretty, very artistic, I thought. There was also a fire pit that someone had built with large stones around it, and there was benches for people to sit on around the fire that had been made out of tree trunks. I found a path near the campsite and I walked down that path, but as I got about 100 feet away from the campsite, I started feeling really like I was being watched. I got a feeling of dread about me, like I really had to, look over my shoulder and watch where I was going. And there was a crossroads in this path, and I stopped there, deciding on which way I wanted to go. I looked up one path that was really dense, had a lot of sticker bushes in it, a lot of small trees, and a lot of bigger trees that were just grown really close together. And I was getting ready to follow that path because it headed towards where I had started from. But I happened to glance further down the path, and I noticed there was two large men standing at the end of this path. And they were kind of lurking. They weren't walking. They were just standing there like they were watching me, waiting to see what I was going to do. And getting a better view of them, I noticed that they looked a lot like they were zombies. They were wearing tattered clothing, really filthy clothes, like they had just crawled out of a grave. And their faces looked like zombies. It was gray skin. There was wounds on their faces. One was wearing a prison uniform, and it was the old type of uniform where it was black and white stripes. So, of course, I didn't go down that path, and I actually started running towards the other path, and finally got the heck up out of that whole area. A couple of nights later, I was driving in my car, and I happened to be driving past this area where the cages were located back in the woods, and it was really foggy that night. I was driving slow because of the fog, and I had a passenger in the car with me. I noticed this figure step out of the fog, and it started walking out in front of my car. And as we got closer to the figure, we saw that it wasn't a normal person. This figure was looked like a ghost. It was fog. It was made out of fog. That's the only way I can describe it. And being surprised about seeing that, I didn't stop my car. I kept going, and we ran right through this figure. And of course, I stopped the car and got out to make sure that I hadn't run over a person. But when we got out and looked around, there was nobody there. So that really freaked us out. we sat there for a minute or so discussing what had just happened, but then I decided that it was time to get out of there and get as far away from that whole area as I could, and that's what we did.
Oh, dead in Ohio.